Hi, I'm Kantha. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. It's now official and confirmed that President Xi Jinping of China will not be attending the G20 summit this weekend in Delhi. And that raises the question, is this a suggestion of a further deterioration in India-China relations, something that seemed to become apparent when the two heads of government met in Johannesburg and the two countries issued versions of what had happened that were not just different, but actually contradictory. Joining me now to discuss the present state of India-China relations is India's former ambassador to China and the present director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, Ashok Kantha. Mr. Kantha, as I said in that introduction, it's now both official and confirmed that President Xi will not be coming for the G20 summit. And this will be his first in-person summit that he's missing since he became president in 2013, except for the Italy summit of 2021, when his own COVID restrictions prevented him from going. So let me start by asking, is this a snub to India?
I would not like to use the word snub, but there is clear messaging, both in context of our relations with China, as also in context of importance China and Xi Jinping attached to G20 as a platform. As you rightly pointed out, the fact that Xi Jinping is not coming to India, coming soon after the informal conversation Prime Minister Modi and President Xi had in Johannesburg, where two sides came out with contradictory narratives, and then publication of the so-called standard map of China, which led to a very sharp rejoinder from India and many other countries, only reaffirms that India-China relations are in a downward spiral, and the possibility of relations improving anytime soon not looking very bright.
I'll come to Johannesburg in a moment's time, but let me pick up on what you said. You said there was clear messaging, even though you didn't accept the word stop. What is the clear message Xi Jinping is sending New Delhi?
Message is both to New Delhi and to other partner countries in G20. Message to India is that in their assessment, relations are not only not doing well, but prospects of improvement are not very high. That's the clear assessment on their side. Message to G20 is that, as you mentioned, he had attended previous summit meetings in person. He's not coming this time. It also signifies a lower level of importance being attached by China and Xi Jinping to G20 as a platform, which is the leading forum for dealing with international economic and financial challenges.
Before I move on to Johannesburg, let me put to you some speculation that has been there on social media and even in articles written by analysts. Some people say that the reason he's not coming, and he's also missing out on the East Asian Summit in Jakarta, the reason he's not coming, he's preoccupied with the crisis facing the Chinese economy. Others say that there could be question marks about his health. There are some people who pointed out that he was limping in Johannesburg, that he looked unsteady, sometimes even uncertain. Do you give any credence to those explanations?
I would not like to comment on health because, this is a sensitive subject and I don't have any inputs to suggest that he has health issues coming in the way of his traveling to New Delhi. He was in Johannesburg just a few days ago. He's not going to Indonesia for East Asia Summit is part of the regular practice followed by China. East Asia Summit is always attended by Premier of the State Council, not by the President of PRC. So that's not any signal. Economic problems are there, no doubt about it, very serious, structural in nature, but I don't think that's something which will hold him back in Beijing.
So he's definitely sending a message to India. Relations are not good and the prospects of them improving soon are very few. And that is the message to be read by his refusal to come to Delhi. It's not failure, it's refusal.
But I'll add that it's also a message to G20. His lack of comfort with this forum. Look at the way G20 is structured today. China is not the central player. It's an influential entity there. But unlike platforms like BRICS or SCO, where China has emerged as the leading country, situation is different.
And he senses the G7 are likely to, in quotes, gang up against him at the G20.
I think there will be some concerns. Ordinarily, that wouldn't have prevented him from coming. But
in the present
circumstances, he's doing it knowing fully well kind of importance Government of India and Prime Minister Modi personally are attaching to the summit.
So there's a certain sense in which his not coming, which is a deliberate decision, is also intended to ensure that the success India wanted out of G20 is not such a great success. His absence and any confusion that he creates in terms of language in the statements will add to the problems India faces.
Well, let me clarify here that when it comes to outcome document, it's not negotiated at the level of heads of state. The Sherpas mostly negotiate the document.
Surely on critical issues they'll need to refer back.
It's unlikely that Xi Jinping would have been personally involved in drafting. They have...
No, I don't mean personal involvement. I mean that the rigidity that China shows is not going to become flexible with his absence.
No. I think there are serious outstanding issues when it comes to draft leaders' declaration.
And his absence will mean there's no flexibility from China.
I don't know. I mean, I would not like to comment on that because the Premier will be there, Li Qiang will be there.
But he's a much less important man.
Yes, no doubt about it.
Let's come to Johannesburg. Did something go wrong when Prime Minister Modi and President Xi met in Johannesburg? For one particular reason. Whilst our Foreign Secretary reported that the two had directed their officials, and I'm quoting now, to intensify efforts at expeditious disengagement and de-escalation, the Chinese Foreign Office spokesperson said something very different. He said the two sides should bear in mind the overall interests of their bilateral relations and handle properly the border issue so as to jointly safeguard peace and tranquility in the border region. That sounds like two different outcomes, not agreement on anything.
Clearly, the narrative which emanated from Beijing and New Delhi were contradictory, as you remarked earlier. We took different positions on who sought the meeting. We took different positions on the outcome of discussions, as you just mentioned. In my assessment, this is emblematic of the current state of relations and how two countries look at the border-related issues.
Isn't it more than that, Mr. Kantha? The Indian version clearly suggested that there was agreement to disengage and de-escalate, and therefore it suggested some sort of movement forward. The Chinese version was nothing more than a reiteration of their traditional position, which is effectively see the border issue in terms of its proper perspective, handle it properly. So it wasn't just disagreement. We were saying two completely different things to our audiences at home.
This is what I was pointing out, that when it comes to how to locate border-related issues in overall relations, two sides have taken dramatically different positions.
Except, is
our
it more?
position is that relations cannot return to normal track unless and until peace and tranquility is restored.
Except that was not what our Foreign Secretary said after Joburg. What he said after Joburg was that there was some sort of agreement to de-escalate and disengage.
I think
he was suggesting movement forward. The Chinese were not suggesting that at all.
Karan, that understanding has been there, that there should be movement towards disengagement and de-escalation. So it's not something new which was worked out.
Except that that was the only thing he stressed when he spoke. So he was putting an emphasis on it, which the Chinese weren't. He was suggesting hope and forward movement. The Chinese were not.
Clearly, we are not on the same page.
So do you think our Foreign Secretary chose the wrong
No,
language?
I don't think so. I don't think he chose the wrong word. That is our priority, that there should be early disengagement and de-escalation in border areas. Only then we can try and return to normalcy in relations. That's not Chinese priority.
No,
Chinese priority is very different.
But we ended up, or at least the Foreign Secretary ended up, converting what is our intention and our priority in what looked like the outcome. It wasn't the outcome of the talks, clearly, but the Foreign Secretary in his presentation made it seem like the outcome. And what he's done, therefore, is to convert our intention and our hope into the outcome. That's where I think he may have spoken too much.
When you have meetings without any joint statement, very often it happens that two sides project different narratives.
So hugely different?
There are, yes. I mean, there are. That's what I'm trying to point out. The fact that two sides came out with such divergent narratives shows kind of dire straits our relations are in at this point of time.
Let me pick up on another discordant note, which in a sense is perhaps even more worrying, that emerged out of Johannesburg. The Chinese spokesperson explicitly made it clear that the meeting happened at Prime Minister Modi's request. The Indians only made their response afterwards, and then too through unnamed sources, not an identified person, and they then claimed that there was a prior request from China for a bilateral meeting. Once again, on this one issue, the differences between the two sides are embarrassing.
Yes, I mean, difference is quite stark. First, in your readout on meetings which take place at the level of heads of state or government, you don't go into issue who sought the meeting. There is a process of discussion, dialogue, which results in setting up these meetings. The Chinese Foreign Office spokesperson made it a point to say that President Xi Jinping had a meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India at the latter's request, which was not quite our understanding. So we informally put out a different version. This again, confirms the point you made originally, that two sides not only came out with different narratives, but these narratives are contradictory in character.
But in this instance, Mr. Kantha, they weren't just contradicting each other. But many people believe that the Chinese version is the stronger one because it was delivered by a spokesperson. We know his name, we know his face, we know he was speaking to reporters, he was cross-questioned, and there he was. The Indian version was from an unnamed source. Who knows who the person is? Who knows what his credibility is? Clearly, in diplomatic terms, a spokesman putting his face up is a much more credible way of responding than an unnamed source effectively whispering it down the phone to journalists.
Well, there are different ways of conveying your message. It doesn't have to be statement by a spokesperson alone. Our message was conveyed and received and repeated by our media. So purpose was served.
Let me put it like this. All of this is so different to the expectations that arose after the two corps commanders met last month when they issued a joint statement, and I'm quoting from that, saying they had a positive, constructive and in-depth discussion on the resolution of the remaining issues along the LAC in the western sector. And then that was followed by 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 meetings at the major general level, which led a major Indian paper, the Indian Express, to run a front page story which claimed limited pullback plan. And an echo of that story, strangely enough, many days later, happened in one of the pink papers. I think it was the Economic Times. Clearly, before Johannesburg, there were pretty high expectations. They got dashed there.
My assessment is that if there were such expectations, they were not based on facts for a number of reasons. One, while there has been limited disengagement so far, northern bank of Pankung Lake,
but not Depsang and not Demchok.
Along Kailash range south of Pankung Lake, Galwan River Valley, Gogra and Hot Spring. Understandings reached reportedly involve creation of buffer zones, which are at
You're
least
talking
partly.
about Demchok, Depsang.
No, I'm talking about Gogra, Hot Spring,
that's old.
Galwan.
No, but this-
let me just complete. That is also meant to be a temporary arrangement. Any restrictions on patrolling in areas which are on our side of the LAC should not be permanent in character.
Absolutely,
So this
because
is one.
As police
Yes.
authorities have made clear, and it's been widely
So
reported, we've lost the right to patrol
so this
some
is-
25, 30 of our earlier patrolling points.
Yeah, I will not go into numbers because I don't have exact facts, but
But let's not
they
get
should.
sidetracked. You're
No,
talking about the past.
let me just complete that because that's a very important point.
But it's the past.
It's not past. No, that's what I'm trying to suggest. It's not past. This is something we should try and retrieve. There should be restoration of patrolling by Indian forces to patrolling points they visiting earlier.
I
That's
accept
number
that.
one. Coming to
the high expectations that were raised before Johannesburg were clearly to do with Depsang and Demchok. And when the Indian Express ran that story, and the date was the 23rd of August on their front page, and they talked about a limited pullback plan, they were talking about Depsang and Demchok.
Yes, not coming to Depsang and Demchok, you're aware of the ground situation. In Depsang Plains, there is this place called what is known as Y Junction or Bottleneck. Beyond that, our troops used to go to 5 patrolling points. They no longer have access to those 5 patrolling points. Likewise, in Demchok area, beyond Nilung Nala, Chanding Nala junction, they don't have access.
And
Now,
the Express story, echoed later by the Economic Times, bizarrely, actually suggested that some sort of agreement had been reached at the Corps Commander level and subsequently at the Major General level, and those Major Generals met for 4 or 5 days, that would allow for what the paper called a limited pullback. That's why I say there were huge expectations when Joburg happened, which were dashed.
Frankly, any limited pullback which will impact our patrolling rights to patrolling points we were visiting earlier will be a negative development.
In other words, if we'd had buffered zones in
Yes,
Depsang and Demchok earlier,
it's
it
not,
would have been a mistake.
Yes, I mean we should. You can have some temporary, transient arrangements.
But even that hasn't happened.
With clear understanding that we will restore patrolling rights.
We're getting into the details. Let's leave the details out because we don't know the details. What I'm talking about is the expectations. The media had clearly expected, as the Indian Express story from the front page suggests, that there would be some sort of limited pullback. And the government allowed those expectations to continue. Remember, the Express story was 23rd August. The government could have easily sent word to say, look, you're exaggerating, you're taking this too far, you've been falsely or wrongly informed. They didn't dampen down the expectations. Wasn't that a mistake?
By and large, there have not been clarifications offered by government.
Isn't that a mistake?
I'll not go into whether it's mistake or not.
Why?
But there is a lack of transparency on this issue.
But why is it not a mistake, sir?
There has to be, when we are entering into arrangements for disengagement, these are not confidence building measures. These are actions which have a bearing on territory. because if you're patrolling some places, you stop patrolling those places, there are territorial implications.
All the more reason
Yes,
if expectations are unrealistic being built up, that the government should dampen them down. And what I'm asking is, in not dampening them down, in allowing them to continue, did the government make a mistake? Because that's why people feel something went wrong.
No, I would not like to say that the government should react to every media report. But
this is not every media report, sir.
There is need for greater transparency, less opacity when it comes to matters which are very sensitive and very important for national security.
So you do accept that there's need for greater transparency, less opacity.
Yes.
In not making for that transparency, is the government making a mistake?
I would not like to use terms like mistake. I can only say
that error?
I can only say that these are issues which should be discussed in a more open manner in Parliament, outside.
As a result of the confusion and contradiction that's emerged, and Xi not coming, has there been a further deterioration in the India-China relationship?
Yes. Relations are today on a downward spiral, as I mentioned earlier. They have not quite bottomed out. And this is only partly because of differences on the management of border. There are deeper structural challenges in India-China relations which need to be addressed.
Which are also not being addressed.
Which are not being discussed perhaps at this point of time.
Because
we are focused on border-related issues. And these structural challenges are fundamental in character. Now, we have different worldviews. We don't agree on how to manage our shared periphery. We have concerns about how China looks at rise of India, and China has concerns about how we are ganging up with the US-led West to contain China. So a whole lot of problems which are there, apart from fact that we have completely unsustainable trade deficit dependencies on China which can be weaponized later.
Can I put it like this? If there was a moment of hope and expectation before Joburg happened, is the relationship worse as a result of that downturn?
First, Karan, I didn't see any scope, any basis for hope and expectation before Joburg. Frankly, that was not my assessment. Others might have made different assessment.
Let's come to another factor of concern. This present impasse in India-China relations is happening at the same time as a fairly significant, sharp upward improvement in China's relationship with Russia, which now both sides claim has no limits. Is there a danger that our difficulties with China could impinge upon our relationship with Russia?
There's no doubt about the fact that strategic linkages between China and Russia are getting intensified. That was the case even before Russian invasion of Ukraine. You referred to partnership without limits. This was the terminology used on 4th February 2022 in joint statement they came out with during President Putin's visit to Beijing that predated the war in Ukraine. In the aftermath of Russia's predicament related to Ukraine, the dependence on China has become even stronger. This does create certain difficulties for us.
Which is what I asked. Could our problems with China affect our relationship with Russia?
At this point of time, it's my understanding that Russia would like to maintain its relations with India. It doesn't want to become too dependent on China either. Russia will never become a vassal state of China. It's very unlikely.
Why hasn't Putin come to Delhi?
Well, Putin hasn't come to Delhi. He is in a serious situation arising out of Russia's involvement in the conflict in Ukraine. If he had come to Delhi, he would have been put in an awkward position because Western countries would like Ukraine to be a major focus of discussions.
But that would be the case whether he comes or not. But the point is, at the moment, he believes that the Ukrainian counteroffensive has failed. Even the West is beginning to believe that the Ukrainian counteroffensive, even if they don't admit it's failed, is going far too slowly. Zelensky has just sacked his defense minister, which is perhaps proof of the fact that something's going wrong. This is a moment when Putin should have been happily walking on the world stage in the company of a host who is a close friend. And he would have given that host a huge boost, particularly when that host has stood by him and never criticized him.
Unlike Xi Jinping's absence in New Delhi for the G20 summit, which I believe involves certain messaging to India, I don't see Putin not being here is meant to be a signal of their assessment of relations with India. Putin made it a point to speak to Prime Minister Modi to explain that he will not be able to come and that he is tasking his foreign minister to be here. So two situations are somewhat different.
Let me raise another aspect of what could be happening in the next 3-4 days when the summit begins. The Hindustan Times reports that Washington is worried that China and Russia together may not just block agreed language on the Ukraine in the G20 statement, but, and I'm now quoting the paper, they are basically extending that obstructionism to broader issues in the larger statement. If that happens, surely Delhi will view this as an unfriendly act by a Russia who we have deliberately supported, who we have never criticized, whose oil we've been buying. And yet if Russia now gangs up with China to make things difficult for us when it comes to the joint statement, that would be surely unfriendly.
If you look at, we don't have facts at present about state of play with regard to draft leaders' declaration, but it's a well-known fact that there are differences on the formulation on Ukraine. Our preference was to go along with the Bali formulation. That is not acceptable to Russia and China.
And hasn't been since
yes.
February, March.
Yes, so that's not acceptable. So there is a real risk of not being able to arrive at a consensus on Ukraine. Apart from that, going by media reports you are referring to, there are other outstanding issues. We are hoping that those issues will be resolved.
Oh, absolutely, sir. But again, I'm quoting the Hindustan Times. China, according to the paper, has opposed several of India's initiatives related to climate change, women-led development at the G20 meetings. And the Times of India claims that, in fact, China is also not happy with India's formulation on MSMEs, even with the use of the Sanskrit term Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
Yeah.
If Russia were to support China on any of these, surely that would be a very unfriendly act by a country that we have deliberately refrained from criticizing from February last year till now.
China has been obstructionist on a whole lot of issues. Ukraine, we can still understand Russian position, but if Russia supports China on other issues you have just referred to, that will clearly be a negative message to us. There's no doubt about it. So let's see. I don't want to jump the gun and without knowing the facts that what position Russia is taking or will take in finalization of leaders' declaration or outcome.
But what you're saying is that if Russia were to side with China on these other issues, that would be unfriendly.
It will be a negative signal. I will avoid using terms like friendly or unfriendly, but it will clearly be a negative signal because this is a summit we are hosting. We have traditionally close relations with Russia. We have also gone out of way to avoid condemning Russia, for instance, regarding its invasion of Ukraine. So our expectation will be that Russia will be supportive of India on those other issues.
So this is a moment to see precisely what Russia does.
See, this is what, when I mentioned earlier, Karan, that Russia's increasing dependence on China will create complications for us down the road.
Precisely the question I asked you.
So this could be, if it happens, this will be an illustration of that problem.
Absolutely. And it will be a sign to us that a country that was very supportive cannot be because of its dependency on China, and it will now fall under Chinese pressure to take modulated or different positions vis-a-vis us.
We'll have to, I think this is a situation we'll have to monitor very closely. There are a whole lot of other issues where implications are far more serious for us. For instance, our entire defense supply relationship with Russia.
Absolutely. And also whatever support they give us on Kashmir.
Exactly.
Right.
So,
my last area with you. There are reports first in the Hindustan Times and after that NDTV picked them up as well, that China has, and I'm quoting, ramped up the construction of reinforced bunkers and underground facilities to better protect military assets from aerial or missile strikes. And this is on top of the fairly substantial expansion of Chinese air bases and runways right along the LAC. How do you as a China expert view this?
I think we have to bear in mind 2 or 3 very clear trends. One, that we have a new situation along India-China borders, where borders have become live. It's very unlikely that we'll return to the earlier position where India-China LAC were thinly patrolled or manned by 2 sides. So there will be a relatively high level of deployment. China is backing up deployment by creating capacities for maintaining troops around the year. And extensive list of infrastructure development, including development of another highway through Aksai Chin, which they have taken, creating facilities for billeting of troops, airfields, long list. So they are there to stay put. We have to bear that in mind. So we should not be in a hurry to deinduct forces from along the borders. We should be prepared to maintain our troops along India-China LAC to safeguard our interests.
There are some people who say that the real motive behind the infrastructure that China is building is to nullify the advantage the Indian Air Force has.
Well, that's only part of the story. They have ramped up their Air Force capability very substantially, including through development of new airfields. They'll have some disadvantage because of the nature of terrain and altitude, but we should not look at infrastructure development in a narrow perspective. It's part of a long-term pattern by China. They have been very consistently, assiduously, systematically ramping up infrastructure along India-China borders. And they will continue to do that. We have to factor in these developments in our defense planning and be prepared for a long haul.
Let me ask you one last question. Is China simply preparing itself for a prolonged, tense standoff along the LAC? Or are they also preparing themselves, by the same token, for the possibility of war?
Well, one can, in a situation where troops from 2 sides with heavy hardware are deployed in close proximity, there is always risk of accident. But in my assessment, at this point of time, China is more inclined to pursue what is known as grey zone operations. That is, engage in military coercion, try to change facts on the ground, staying below the threshold of outright military conflict. And that seems to be the case not only along India-China borders, but in other theatres as well. South China Sea, East China Sea, and Taiwan Strait.
So at a time when the relationship is deteriorating, and you accepted earlier that there's been a deterioration even after Joburg because of what's happened, all of this is a matter of concern, what's happening on the border, these developments.
Yes, it's definitely a matter of concern. Also, there's need for, I think, I have argued elsewhere that we must maintain our channels of communication open with China, including at the highest level, if opportunities come up. without investing the dialogue with undue optimism. We have to be clear-eyed about possibilities, but it's a very difficult, complex and sensitive relationship which requires intensive dialogue, not just on border-related issues,
But on everything.
but across the board, including on our strategic concerns.
Mr. Kantha, thank you very much
Not
indeed.
at all. It's my pleasure.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.